boxing has the deepest history in all of the organized sports. The early days were chronicled through writing, and we're now able to witness historic fights from previous centuries through videos and more. We have long pondered who would win in a matchup between the greats of the past. In today's episode, we take a look at a matchup between the first recognized undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the Boston Strong Boy John L. Sullivan, versus the first black undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the Galveston Giant Jack Johnson. John L. Sullivan had a total of 41 official bouts under the Marquess of Queensberry rules, which is what all boxers compete under today. Sullivan had 38 wins, 32 by knockout, with a knockout ratio of 84%. He suffered only one defeat. He had one draw. He stood at 5 feet 10 and a half inches with an aggregate weight of 208 pounds over his career. This included a 74-inch reach. Jack Johnson had a total of 76 official bouts along with a number of exhibitions. Johnson had 54 wins, 34 by knockout, with a knockout ratio of 63%. He suffered 11 defeats, 6 of them by knockout. He had 8 draws. He also had 1 no contest and 18 no decision bouts. He stood at 6 feet 0 and a half inches with an aggregate weight of 203 pounds over his career. This included a 74-inch reach. Sullivan was the first superstar in the sport of boxing, and is credited with taking boxing mainstream. Sullivan's is the last bare-knuckle champion, but he was truly a proponent for gloved fighting, the sport we know now. Sullivan was usually quick out of the gates and was the first to introduce the knockout as a regular occurrence in the sport at a mainstream level. Under the bare-knuckles rules, fights could get drawn out and often featured a lot of holding and wrestling, not to mention eye gouging. Sullivan, for his time, represented the shift to knockouts in a manner that raised the sport of boxing to unprecedented heights. Sullivan often swarmed his opponents with a barrage of shots which usually led to early knockouts or stoppages. He wasn't one for movers and what would now be considered more defensive fighters, and truly thrived off of fighters who chose to come forward and fight fire with fire. Sullivan would fight anywhere as he truly came of age in an era where a barge, basement, or ballroom could prove equally satisfying as the standard boxing ring. Born in Galveston, Texas, Jack Johnson is one of the biggest names the sport has ever seen. He truly transformed the heavyweight division during his time with an unprecedented defensive prowess. Johnson learned from an early defeat to Joe Koinski to take his time and focus on defense, having already been considered one of the great offensive heavyweights at that time. With this, Johnson was able to become arguably the greatest heavyweight the world has seen. His combination of size, skill and strength proved to be overwhelming for many of the top heavyweights during his reigns as both colored and world heavyweight champion. Johnson mastered the art of tying up his opponents and fully nullifying their offense on the inside. He was also a master of pacing himself, and only going for the knockout when he felt he'd fully worn opponents to the point of no return. Johnson also was a master of mind games and routinely played both to fighters and crowds during his fights. Ever the showman, Johnson would at times drag out fights in order to aggravate the viewing audience, all the while smiling through the fiasco. Johnson also ushered in a level of in and out of the ring flashiness still seen today. Johnson never met a camera he didn't like and a wide audience, a compliment to his personality and style. Sullivan held the world heavyweight title from 1882 to 1892. Some of his more notable opponents are Charlie Mitchell, who he faced on more than one occasion, though under bare-knuckle and London prizefighting rules. James J. Corbett, to whom he lost his title in 1892. Paddy Ryan, his first signature win, and another fighter he faced on more than one occasion. Patsy Cardiff, for whom he drew with after breaking his left arm. Jake Kilrain, the fighter for which he first won the bare-knuckle championship. And Dominic McCaffrey, a contender from his time. Sullivan is also alleged to have participated in around 400 to 500 unofficial fights and/or exhibitions for which he won. Sullivan embarked on a tour across America and offered as much as $1,000 to anyone who could last 4 3-minute rounds with him in the ring. As he once proclaimed, "I can lick any son of a bitch in the room." Johnson held the world heavyweight title from 1908 to 1915. In 1908 he eagerly and easily defeated then heavyweight champion Tommy Burns in Australia to pick up the strap. Johnson has more notable opponents than we can list. He fought arguably the greatest fighter ever in multi-division great, the Boston Bone Crusher Sam Langford. The hard-hitting former colored heavyweight champion, Sam McVie. Joe Jeanette, former colored heavyweight champion. Light heavyweight great, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. Hard-hitting middleweight great, the Michigan assassin Stanley Ketchel. Multi-division UK great, Bob Fitzsimmons. Former undisputed heavyweight champion, the Boilermaker James J. Jeffries. Denver Ed Martin. And young Peter Jackson. Style and skill go to Johnson. Johnson was a master of defense and really learned to use his size and to tie up opponents on the inside, nullifying their offense. Offense would be Sullivan's greatest weapon in trying to overcome Johnson. The edge on endurance goes to Sullivan. Both men fought in long fights, but bare-knuckle work included. Sullivan found success in longer fights when more than just punches were thrown into the mix. Chin as even as both fighters had great beards. Sullivan was knocked out once in his career, while well past his formidable fighting prime. Johnson was knocked out once while still green, and later in his career when past his prime. The slight edge on power goes to Johnson. Johnson was in fact a very offensive fighter earlier in his career, and gunned for the knockout, which he was successful at. Sullivan used power to blast through the majority of his challengers, but Johnson would prove to be his best foe. Speed goes to Johnson with a slight edge. Johnson often fought defensively, but when he went for the knockout, he would use blazing speed and power to finish his opponents. Resume undoubtedly goes to Johnson, whose opponents list reads like a who's who of boxing greats. Sullivan did fight some of the top competition during his era, but there were some top-class matchups we never got to see. Intangibles are even. Both fighters are giants of the sport in name. Johnson had the greatest impact of any fighter in the mid-1900s through the early 1910s, while Sullivan had the biggest impact of any boxer in the 1880s. Both fighters are truly icons that span generations. The story of boxing can't be told without both fighters being included. All things considered, 86 Boxing favors the Galveston giant Jack Arthur Johnson for the victory over the Boston strongboy John L. Sullivan via decision. This would be likely the highest-grossing fight ever if fought in the time of both champions. Jack Johnson was able to test himself at a higher level than the great John L., but Sullivan was instrumental in the growth of the sport and would prove to be a formidable foe. The fight in itself would be fought with bad intentions, and I don't see either fighter refusing to let up until the final bell. Sullivan would get to Johnson early and may even rock him, but Johnson would bide his time and tie up Sullivan, forcing his offense to suffer before making a late charge to give him the victory. Do you see the fight going a different way? Feel free to let us know in the comments. Thank you for tuning in.